This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Pursue any craft, skill, trade, or job long enough, and a variety of experiences will present themselves. Some will be lovely, memorable, and easy. And others will be the opposite. They will be challenging, frustrating, and I suppose memorable, but for a different reason. But all of this makes the work interesting. A still life of ripe fruit, captured and frozen in oil forever. But this painting is not still. It has lived a life. It has seen good and bad. And the bad is why it is here in my studio today. Looking at this painting, we can instantly spot some old work. We can see textural differences and anomalies on the surface of the painting that just don't read as correct. We can see overpaint all over this painting. We can see areas like the berries that just don't look like they were created by the same hand as the rest of the painting. We can see fill-in material errantly applied, overpaint on the entire background. We also know that this painting was glued to a compressed cardboard with some unknown adhesive. Even if one were to look at this work and characterize it generously and forgivingly, it can only be understood as profoundly bad. And I have seen bad. This may be the Everest of bad. And so, while some paintings are cooperative, easy, and lovely to work on, others, well, you know just looking at them that they're going to be difficult. They're going to provide unique challenges, and to some degree, they are going to fight you every step of the way. And so, today, I present to you the Brawler. So, let the battle begin. Now, whenever I start a project that I know is going to require a tremendous amount of work, including removing any substrate like a canvas, a board, or wood, I always face the painting. And the facing is absolutely critical for a couple of reasons. Simply put, it protects the face of the painting. Yes, the overpaint and varnish will provide a modicum of protection, but not a lot. And I'm going to be handling this painting quite a bit. And so this washi kozo, which is a mulberry paper from Japan, though it is fairly thin, it is incredibly strong and robust. And when applied to the face of this painting with a warmed and melted fish gelatin, it provides a very strong protective layer for this paint. And that's important because as I work on this painting, I'm going to be sliding it around on my table, and I don't want to scratch the paint layer. In addition, this facing will hold the painting together. It's kind of like when archaeologists remove dinosaur bones from the sand. They first pour a plaster cast on the dinosaur bones and then excavate from underneath. And that plaster cast supports, cradles, and protects that delicate dinosaur bone. Well, this does kind of the same thing. Because we don't know what adhesive was used, because we don't know the condition of the original canvas, we have to assume the worst, that once we start removing the old board and the old adhesive, that the canvas will be completely deteriorated, and that may not in fact be holding the painting together. And if that's the case, this washi kozo will do the same as that plaster on the dinosaur bone. If that dinosaur bone cracks, the plaster holds it in place. If the original canvas is completely rotted or deteriorated, well, this washi kozo will hold the paint in place until I can find a better support for it. Washi kozo mulberry paper from Japan, plus food-grade fish gelatin from Italy, a $2 bristle brush from the local hardware store, and we're in business. Now, once the washikozo or facing has been allowed to dry for a day or two, I can start thinking about removing this canvas from the board, or rather removing the board from the canvas. Sometimes we can take the canvas off of the board by application of heat or injection of solvent, but in this case it's not going to be possible. And so instead of peeling off the canvas from this board, I have to peel this board off of the canvas. And this board is nothing a conservator would use today. In fact, I don't think it is something that a conservator of yesteryear would have used. This is just your run-of-the-mill compressed cardboard, the contents of which, well, it's just paper pulp. Unknown, unverified, no pH listing on the board. It is not an archival product, and it is wholly inappropriate for use in art conservation. It's not even really appropriate for use in art making. But this is what somebody chose to mount this canvas to. And now the saving grace here is that this board is composed of layers. And as such, I can use several tools: a scalpel, a thin, flexible palette knife, and a large, more rigid palette knife to pry up, peel back, break off, well, just about any way I can get some of this mass off of the back. And I'm not trying to take it all off at once. In fact, I'm just going layer by layer, peeling back a little bit, moving on, peeling back a little bit more. I'm just trying to thin this down so that when I move on to the next step, there's less mass I have to contend with. And this is really boring and uninteresting and kind of frustrating, because every layer I peel back, I just realize how ridiculous it is that somebody glued a painting to this board. But that's why I get paid the big bucks, to suffer. I'm joking, and luckily this is a relatively small painting, but this is really an unpleasant thing to have to do. It hurts your hands, your knuckles end up getting cut up, and it's just a bummer because this could have been avoided. While the focus of any painting is the image and what we as the viewers see, if the behind-the-scenes work, the structural stuff, isn't good, well, it's going to have a negative impact on what we do see, and that's going to ruin the experience for us. And that's not all that different from the way your website does or doesn't work. And with Squarespace, you don't actually have to think about any of that structural behind-the-scenes stuff. They take care of all of it for you. And by letting Squarespace handle all of the technical aspects of website building and maintenance, it allows you to focus on what your viewers and visitors want to see, your content. And whether that's your business, your hobby, your passion, your artwork, that's why they're there. Nobody's going to your website to admire the integration of your gallery. They want to see the artwork. And sure, you could learn to roll your own code, but unless you're a masochist and like suffering, like me, scraping, it's just easier to let Squarespace handle it because that's their job and they do it phenomenally well. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Anyhow, as I'm peeling back this paper, I have considered using other techniques. Now you have seen me use a router and a router sled to remove wood from the back of a painting. And unfortunately, that's not going to be applicable here because the bits, even though they're high-speed steel, they get dulled by the paper. Yes, it's strange to think that paper can dull those bits, but wood doesn't. Well, paper does, and it does very fast, and it generates heat, which is why the bits get dull. And then when the bits get dull, they don't cut, they gouge. And obviously, gouging is not something I want. In addition, this board is flexible. You can see it moving up and down. And so if I were to run a router across this and the board flexed or bent upwards, well, that bit may cut right through the board or gouge and go right to the face of the painting. Again, another thing I don't want. Now I've looked into using hand planes, but sharpening a hand plane over and over and over again is not something that I am interested in. And again, they just don't cut through this paper very well. You can see that a brand new razor-sharp scalpel still has difficulty cutting through this paper. And this blade will probably be dull after I do, maybe 6 square inches. Maybe less. So I'm going to go through a lot of scalpel blades. Now this board is composed of layers, and the topmost layer on either side is a different color. I guess they would call that the cosmetic layer to hide all of the garbage that's in between. The good news here is that it gives me a reference point for when I know that I am coming up to the edge of the canvas. So I can remove the mass of this gray stuff and leave the tan stuff for the scalpel. Now I am optimistic here that the entire painting is going to be loosely adhered to this board. If that's the case, well, my day would be made, and actually you wouldn't be watching this video because it would have been an easy project, one that didn't throw a left hook and a right jab at me. So, spoiler alert, the entirety of this painting is not loosely adhered. But that there are these air pockets or areas where there wasn't good adhesion is again indicative of just how lousy this work was and just how poor of an execution it was. Now, I mentioned that this painting is going to throw me a bunch of punches. And the first is the removal of this board. It's going to take a lot of work because once I've gotten the mass down, I have to shave down all of this leftover gray. And it's about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters thick, which is just about the limit of where my scalpel blade is effective. And so once I'm done exploring this corner, just trying to gain some information, well, I'll take that information and reflect on it. And what it's telling me is that I'm not going to be able to get through this quickly or easily. The adhesive is really strong and really stubborn. And so I am going to have to shave down all of this board. And that's really how it's done. Just shaving the board down, slicing it off little bit by little bit. And I mentioned that this will dull the blade to the point of being ineffective and dangerous after about 6 or so square inches. So we can figure that I'm going to go through 30 or 40, maybe even more blades. Now, the blades aren't terribly expensive, but it's just a point to show how hard it is to remove this paper product. Now again, I mentioned I'm just removing the mass of the gray. If some of the tan comes off, that's great, but I'm not looking to get down to the canvas at this stage. From my initial investigations, that adhesive is tricky, to say the least. It's flexible and somewhat plastic, yet it resists the blade. And so it's not something like a rabbit skin glue that is really brittle and would just be able to be shaved right off with the scalpel blade. It's something else. And I'm going to have to make some tests to deduce just what that is. So on to testing the adhesive. I'm going to lay down a couple of different cotton swabs saturated with different adhesives, just as investigatory measures. They'll penetrate through that top layer of paper, and hopefully they'll have an effect on this adhesive. You can see the first one kind of does. It is enabling me to remove some of the adhesive, but not enough, and really not effectively. So the second one hopefully will be better. And instantly I can feel and see that it is more effective. It is softening up that adhesive. But that adhesive is really tough. And based on my experience with similar adhesives and the solvent that I'm using, well, I am 100% certain that this is PVA or Elmer's glue. And while some PVAs are removable with solvent, most are not, particularly if they are waterborne. They're just not designed to be removed. They're a permanent adhesive. And there are some solvents that will swell and soften PVA, like the one I'm using now, but you can see it's just marginally effective. This is not going very well. And so if the first punch was having to remove all of this board manually by scraping, Well, awaiting me underneath is an uppercut. And that's the fact that this entire painting was glued to board with Elmer's glue. So knowing that it's Elmer's, and knowing the solvent that I need to use, I can start actually removing it. Unfortunately, this solvent is a real tricky beast. It evaporates extremely quickly, and it cannot be gelled. I have tried every which way I know how. I even consulted an organic chemistry professor who works at a local university to assist me, a friend of mine. And he informed me that, much to my dismay, this particular solvent will never gel, at least not effectively. It'll have to be diluted to a point where it's just a former shell of itself. And so what I do is saturate a piece of felt, lay it down, and then cover it with a piece of plastic film to slow down the evaporation rate. And it is not 100% effective. The solvent still evaporates. But what it does is provide enough exposure that the adhesive can start to swell. Now, I have to do it in multiple passes, because you saw the first pass, while it allowed me to get the board remnants and the first layer of adhesive off, the adhesive evaporated too quickly, and the adhesive stiffened back up. So with a second pass, a second exposure of solvent, I can remove the adhesive down to the canvas layer. But even as I'm doing this, you can start to see the old adhesive dry out and get gummy or sticky. And so I only have a matter of really seconds or minutes after I peel back the plastic film to remove this old adhesive before it starts stiffening up again. Now, yes, I can reapply the solvent and start over, but that takes a lot of time. And given the amount of time that I've already spent on this piece, and the amount of time I know I'm going to have to spend on this piece, I would like to not make it a longer relationship, because this is not a loving relationship. This painting has thrown me an uppercut in the form of Elmer's glue, and I have to absorb it and just keep fighting on. But the good news is that I can remove this adhesive. I can remove the old PVA or Elmer's glue all the way down to the canvas. And while it's a slow process, I would say that for each of these squares of felt, it takes a good 15 minutes of exposure to remove the first layer, and then another 15 minutes of exposure to remove the second layer, and then probably another 10 minutes on a third pass to clean up the little bits. So it is about a 30 to 40 minute process to remove one of these 3-inch by 5-inch areas of adhesive. Now extrapolate that over the entirety of this painting, and you can see how much time is going to be required. Suffice it to say, I am in this for the long haul, whether I like it or not. This painting is going to fight me all along the way. And so while the removal of this adhesive from the back of this canvas is slow and arduous and unpleasant and not something that I'm terribly excited about doing, that the results are positive and that they are what I am after, well, that gives me some comfort. It allows me to take solace in the fact that the work that I'm doing will have a positive impact on this painting. Now, over the past 20 plus years, I have probably scraped for a large portion of my life, probably more than I care to remember. And the one benefit is that it has given me a muscle memory. This skill is something that is kind of ingrained in my bones. It is highly coveted, and I travel the world, go to fairs and freak shows and museums to demonstrate my scraping skills. No, I mean, actually that's not true at all. Nobody cares that I'm good at scraping glue off of surfaces. Maybe just you, the audience, but really, outside of conservation, it's not a terribly marketable skill. But within conservation, and within my field of painting conservation, it is incredibly important. Because having that muscle memory allows me to move through this really fast. I know how to scrape. I feel it. There's a way of holding the scalpel, of moving my arm at the elbow, of slightly tilting my wrist to adjust the angle of attack of the blade. And all of that combined together, I don't think about that anymore. It just happens automatically. And the reason I'm talking about this is because when I first started, and scraping was one of the things that I was tasked with doing or punished by my father, scrape this painting, you'll enjoy it. Right, famous last words. It took me forever. A painting of this size might have taken several weeks for me to scrape because I was moving at a snail's pace. And not because I was doing a better job, but I just didn't know how to scrape. And I was nervous and scared. And so every time the blade touched the canvas, it was as if I was handling radioactive plutonium or something. I was super, super careful. And to some degree, that was a paralysis. And as I did it more, just like as anybody does anything over a period of their lifetimes, it becomes automatic. And they don't have to think about it anymore. It becomes part of them. And not only do they gain the ability to move faster, but they gain the ability to move better. And so obviously, everybody knows that if you do something over and over and over again, well, that's called practice, you get better with it. And this is the same thing. It seems exotic or super high stakes, but you know, if you have spent 70, 80, 90, 200 hours scraping, well, you're going to be better at scraping than if you've only scraped for 25 minutes. And so what looks on camera like something that's just crazy, a scalpel on the back of canvas, really for me is just kind of automatic and, well, not all that interesting or complicated. So once I have removed the mass of that glue, I'm going to go back and really quickly just glide over the surface of this canvas to remove any extra residues. Just little bits of glue that are still sticking up. I'm using almost no pressure here, just letting the blade slide along the surface of the canvas. Again, something that I have refined over years of doing it. Something that, in the beginning, well, this would have taken me a full day. And so with all of this paper and board removed, and with all of the adhesive removed, we can start to see what the canvas looks like. And of course, there's a curveball and another punch. This canvas is not going to be cooperative. And at some point, before it was glued to that board with Elmer's glue, well, somebody painted white lead all over all of the areas of damage on the canvas. Why they chose white lead? Well, I can only think that somewhere somebody is laughing in their grave at the conservator that first had to scrape off all of the board, then scrape off all of the Elmers, just to find goops and globs of white lead waiting for them. Little landmines planted deep underground. And I have to remove this stuff because it's texturally different than the canvas. It's built up. If it were just white lead smears or stains, it wouldn't really matter to me. But because it's built up and you can feel it, well, that's a problem. Because if I don't remove this, those areas are going to telegraph to the front of the painting. And then my conservation work will be no better than what was done previously. So using another suite of solvents, this time designed to break down paint, some really aggressive stripping chemicals, I can remove this white lead. First, I have to put it on and let it swell and soften. That can take 10 or 15 minutes. Then I scrape it, and then I clean off the residue. Now you'll notice that there is still some paint embedded into the canvas. I'm not going to bother removing that because at this point it's smooth, it's flat. And because this painting is going to get a lining, there are some pretty significant areas of damage, and this canvas isn't structurally sound anymore. Nobody's ever going to see this canvas, so it's not really a concern to make it cosmetically beautiful. I just need to make it structurally sound and make it so that when I do the lining, we don't have any telegraphing to the front. So, moving in supersonic speed, I am removing this white lead, and you can see that it does come off. In fact, much of it comes off completely. And that's great, because if it didn't, well, that would be another problem I would have to deal with. Now I have come to a point where all of the stuff on the back of the painting has been removed. The old cardboard, the Elmer's glue, the white lead. The canvas is raw and exposed, and I'm going to do what I call a vapor treatment. And that is a technique whereby using heat, moisture, and pressure, I can flatten and relax that canvas. And doing it on my table here will make sure that the canvas is as flat as possible. It's important because it does a couple of things. It removes some of those waves and bulges that were in the painting, but it also establishes a baseline, so to speak. And that enables the paint on the surface of the painting to return to its natural state. That is, any impasto will come back if it has been depressed. So, onto the hot table, heat it up, pressure, cooled, underweights, and after a couple of days, the painting is out. Now, this canvas had some significant damage to it. Lots of holes, lots of gouges, lots of nicks. And I need to make sure that those are filled in, because if I don't, when I do the interleaved lining, those will become divots on the face of the painting. The pressure of the vacuum table will force the paint to sink down wherever there is a missing piece of canvas. Now, at times I have used washi kozo to build up these areas, but in this case, I am using a synthetic fill-in material. And this fill-in material is based around the same adhesive that I'm going to use for the interleaved lining. And that matters because it's going to allow a really good bond. It's also going to melt when it is exposed to heat and conform to the shape wherever the canvas is missing. So I'm going to apply it, smooth it out as best I can. It doesn't need to be super accurate. I'm just looking to fill in all of these areas where the canvas is missing. I could try to cut little patches and inlay them, but they're never going to fit perfectly, and that would become a problem for the surface. So by using this fill-in medium, I can kind of plaster over or patch these areas with a solid material. At least once it's dry, it'll be solid. And then, when the painting is lined, these areas won't become divots. So once the fill-in material has been allowed to dry, it turns white, and I can use a solvent to remove the excess. So simply going over the area, we will see that the extra material that is around the fill-in will dissolve and get picked up by the cotton. And this, again, just like on the front, is important because I don't want to put material where it shouldn't be, but I also don't want to leave extra material that could create a bump or a bulge on the face. So now that area is filled in. I will continue this process for all of these areas. And you may be asking, why didn't I just coat the entire back of the painting? Well, this fill-in medium is expensive, and it is not designed for that. And so if I did that, it probably wouldn't react the way I want during this interleaved lining process. Now, an interleaved lining is whereby the original canvas is mounted to a rigid substrate and then to a new piece of canvas. And that interleaf, in this case a heavy gauge PET film, provides a couple of benefits. One, it provides a little bit more rigidity for the original canvas so that it's not so soft and flopping around. It also immobilizes the canvas. And that means that when humidity changes, the canvas isn't going to absorb that humidity, expand, and then contract when it dries out. And limiting those micro movements is absolutely critical to making sure that any of these tears or holes don't open back up. So I'm going to apply a heat-activated adhesive that's been warmed up, and using a roller I can achieve good coverage. And I'm using a gossamer matrix here. And it's that kind of transparent, opaque fabric that's sitting on top of the canvas. And the reason that I'm doing that is that this gossamer will fill in some of those little micro divots, and it will also hold a little bit more adhesive. This really isn't necessary if the original canvas is smooth and flat and free of issues, but when you have a canvas that's been so abused and damaged as this one, this is kind of, I don't want to say a crutch, but it is a little bit more support, and it enables a better final lining process. It allows for more adhesive to be there, and it allows for some of those little deflections to be filled in without having to add another layer of fill-in material. In addition, this nylon also will hold on to the canvas really well and make sure that there is a complete bond between the canvas and the PET film. Unlike the bond we saw from the board to the canvas where there were gaps and air pockets, this will not have that. We will have a complete uniform bond, which is really critical into not only making sure that this canvas is supported, but making sure that there's no movement and that any of the areas that we're going to take great care to put back together start to fail or deteriorate. Because movement in a canvas can cause fill-in medium to crack and break loose, and tears and holes to open back up. And I will apply the same adhesive to the front and back of the PET film. And one thing that you might notice when I'm rolling on the adhesive is that when I come to the ends, sometimes I will lift up the roller and let it spin. That's an old printmaking technique that I learned to achieve even and uniform distribution of ink. By lifting it and letting the roller spin a little bit, when you put it back down, it doesn't align with where it was lifted up in the first place. So once I have covered both sides with the adhesive, I can let this dry. That'll take overnight. And then I can move on to starting to put this painting back together. And that's what we're going to see in the next episode. And there is an ad and sponsor free version of this episode that comes out ahead of the one on YouTube, available for my Patreons. In addition, when this project is all complete, I will answer their questions in a follow-up video. So go check that out if you're at all curious. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned to see what happens next.